to see you. Welcome, 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 welcome. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Always a good thing to hit the notifications bell. We are here for yet another live stream. As you can see, I am at my office right now, and it's really great to be able to engage with all of you tonight. I'd like to do these as often as I possibly can. Every opportunity to engage with our little community here and repeat some of our running jokes about unnamed diet beverage and that kind of thing is always a pleasure. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. For those of you who may be new, the format is this. I give my opening remarks. After that, I then do the roll call, where we find out who is on the other side of the camera, who is watching. I call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, I answer the super chat questions until we are done. That's how it works on these live streams. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, post this out wherever videos are posted, Reddit, Bunker Chan, Facebook, Twitter, Facebook groups, Facebook Twitters, Facebook social medias, YouTubes, wherever. Anyone is free, by the way, to cut up these streams if you want. If you want to take a section of these streams and post it to your channel, I don't hold that against you. I'm not going to sue you for doing that. So if you want to take a section that you really like and post it on your own channel, go for it. I might grab it and post it here as a standalone piece, but that's always welcome. And that applies to the Saxton lectures as well. There you go. Yeah, we engage with people. So the way this works, like I said, the second half of the show, after I do the roll call, which is like the intermission, the second half of the show is basically all me reading out and answering super chats. So if you have something you want me to talk about, send me a super chat. Send me a super chat. I will write it down with this pen, and then the second half of the show is me answering your super chat questions. Sudan. All right. That will be me answering your super chat questions at the second half of the show. And from there, that's how we roll. So keep the super chats rolling in. I will be writing them down, and in the second half of the show, we answer those questions. All hands and arms inside the carpet, and away we go. I think that's a quote from the movie Aladdin. Anyhow, folks, for my opening remarks tonight, I just wanted to update you. Israel. Joining. Okay. All right, writing down those super chats. So my opening remarks tonight, I wanted to just update you on a few events that you might not be aware of. Things that U.S. mainstream media has not really chosen to report on, but are very important. And these are not small things. These are rather important developments that are happening. They're not developments that are happening in the United States. They are developments that are happening around the world. The first one is that in Yemen, there is an ongoing civil war in Yemen between the popular committees, the Yemeni army, the religious organization Ansar Allah, which leads a coalition government in Yemen. Leads a coalition government in Yemen. Wrote it down. They are fighting off the Saudi invaders. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has invaded Yemen. This war has been going on since 2015. The independent revolutionary councils and popular committees of Yemen are resisting the Saudi invasion. The Saudis want to restore their puppet, Mansour Hadi, onto the throne to become the president of Yemen. He ran in an election where there was only one candidate on the ballot. They want to restore him, whereas the popular revolutionary government that the Yemeni people formed, that popular revolutionary government formed by the Yemeni people is resisting the Saudi invasion. Now, they most recently have taken back control of Marib and Shabwa. Those are two important districts in Yemen. And there's been a battle going on as the popular revolutionary committees have been battling to take control of those districts. And the Saudi forces, most of which are mercenaries from Pakistan and from other parts of the world, the Saudis have hired to do their dirty work for them in Yemen. Those forces were beaten back. Marib and Shabwa in Yemen, those districts are now back under the control of the popular committees. There's a war going on in Yemen. The people of Yemen are fighting for their national liberation. Yemen is very much the Vietnam of our time. This Yemen is a country, it's on the Arabian Peninsula, and it is one of the poorest countries in the world. And it is battling against the fourth largest military budget in the world. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has the fourth largest military budget in the world. They've got all kinds of U.S.-made weapons. They've got all kinds of U.S.-made military equipment. They exclusively purchase their military hardware from the United States. They get support from the United States, from the Pentagon and others. And they have been unloading on the people of Yemen since 2015. They have barricaded Yemen. They have prevented people from getting food. They have prevented people from getting medical aid. But yet the people of Yemen are resisting. And U.S. propaganda wants us to believe that the Yemeni people that are fighting back are simply agents of Iran. It's all a big Iranian conspiracy. Well, this is false. Writing it down. This is false. That's not the case. The people of Yemen are striving for their national liberation. Many people don't realize, but the logo of the Ansarullah organization has a shaft of wheat on it, which stands for economic development. And the shaft of wheat, which stands for economic development, represents the aspirations of the coalition. Now, the Houthis, or the Ansarullah, they are a religious minority of Shia Muslims, Zaydi Shia Muslims, and they want to have, their autonomy so they can practice their religion and have a religious government in certain parts of northern Yemen. There's also the Southern Movement in Yemen, which are people that want to restore the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen, the DPRY. They're communists. There are also Nasserists. Those are Arab socialists that want to unify the Arab world. They have an Arab socialist perspective. There are Baathists. It is a coalition, and the popular assemblies and revolutionary committees, the Ansarullah organization, the Southern Movement, are all unified in trying to drive the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia out of Yemen. And the United States is backing Saudi Arabia, and the British are backing Saudi Arabia, and the Israelis are backing Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has got the support of all the major imperialist countries. All right. Uses. Wrote it down. Saudi Arabia has the support of all the major imperialist countries, but the people of Yemen continue to resist. They continue to resist. They are fighting for their national liberation. And I myself feel particularly connected to that struggle because I was on a ship from Iran trying to bring medical aid to Yemen with the Red Crescent Society. We created an international incident trying to bring medical aid to Yemen, with the Saudis ultimately blocking our ship and bombing the port where we were supposed to arrive. They bombed the port and killed dock workers and medical students and others. It was horrendous stuff. And, I feel particularly excited for the people of Yemen to win their national liberation. The fact that they have withstood all of this shows they're not agents of Iran. To have all all of this come down on you. All of this come down on you. To have the whole world, it seems, at war with them, but to continue to resist so effectively. All right, dual power. That really shows, that really truly shows the power and the popular support of the Yemeni national liberation movement. They have a huge amount of popular support on the ground. Okay. Writing it down. They had a huge amount of popular support on the ground, or else this war would have been over a long time ago. And the fact that they are resisting, the fact that they are standing strong, the fact that they have withstood this onslaught against Saudi Arabia, the fact that many people in the Western capitalist countries are increasingly aware of how horrific and criminal the actions of Saudi Arabia are in Yemen, the fact that there is increasing distrust of Saudi Arabia, increasing demands that the USA stop arming Saudi Arabia. In Britain, there are similar movements as well. All of this shows how strong the people of Yemen are. This is really, like I said, the Vietnam of our time. There is a national liberation war going on. The people of Yemen are fighting for their freedom as a people, for their national liberation. And if you're a genuine socialist, a genuine anti-imperialist, you should be standing in solidarity with the Yemeni people. You should be condemning the U.S. backing of Saudi Arabia. You should be cheering for the people of Yemen as they take back control of Marib and Shabwa. You should be doing that. You should absolutely be doing that because the people of Yemen are right and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is wrong. And it's that simple. It is that simple. The people of a small country can surely defeat aggression by a big country, but only if they dare to rise in struggle. That is Mao Zedong, one of his last statements, and it's very, very important to remember, right? So there you go. All right, a very British coup. I'm not familiar with that movie, Neil. I'll have to check it out. Very British coup. Oh, all right. Someone's recommending that I interview someone about their book on Alexander Hamilton, which I could very easily do. So that would be good. All right. Now, among other things that we need to discuss as we talk about the Yemeni people fighting for their national liberation, I wanted to turn to another corner of the world, a corner of the world that I will soon be in, along with some of the John Brown volunteers and some of the other allies and associates of the Center for Political Innovation, which is Nicaragua. The Nicaraguan government, led by the Sandinistas, President Daniel Ortega, Vice President Rosario Murillo, this government, they have been fighting for their people. They have cut poverty very significantly. They have furthermore wiped out illiteracy in Nicaragua. They have launched a micro-entrepreneurship program. They have taken huge strides. They're building new roads and infrastructure across the country. I just wanted to share with you, today, the government of Nicaragua launched a bus cooperatives program. Right? Nicaragua, there's a lot of rural areas in Nicaragua. And one thing that they've just done is they've launched a series of bus cooperatives where certain areas will have their own buses that will provide transportation. And these buses will be owned collectively by the people in the areas, and they will provide transportation for people in rural areas to other places. And this bus cooperative program was kicked off by President Daniel Ortega himself, and they're building, they're giving buses to various regions. And in Nicaragua, they have the slogan, "Grow where you are planted." And that slogan means development of rural areas, right? And all across the developing world, and even in the West, we have this tendency of people in rural areas remaining poor. And because it's getting harder and harder to live in rural areas, because living standards are dropping around the planet, because of that, we have young people going to the cities. and young people from rural areas pile into the cities. I'm a great example of that. I grew up in a rural area in Ohio, and now I live in a city, New York City. And all across the developing world, you have young people from the countryside moving to the cities. The Arab Spring was very much a result of that. When there was a drought, a lot of, the farming and the jobs on the farms and all that weren't working out. And so 2011, you had all kinds of young people from rural areas moving to urban centers. And this leads to a lot of problems, right? Because it leads to those young people being taken advantage of by employers. It leads to drugs. It leads to crime. You have a lot of displaced young people, and it's not a good situation. The fact that so many young people can't live in the countryside and instead flee to urban centers, it leads to a lot of social problems, and especially in South and Central America, you see this problem. If you go to the capital cities in Honduras and Guatemala, Guatemala City, you will see a lot of young people from rural areas who have, basically because they can't get jobs, have had to flee to the urban centers to try and survive. And when they get there, they don't necessarily find good paying jobs. They find narco gangs, they find prostitution, they find all kinds of bad things, right? And it's not good. It's not good. All right. Liberalism. Writing down the super chats. So they say instead that these young people should be able to grow where they are planted, meaning they want to bring economic development to the rural areas in Nicaragua. And part of that has meant granting autonomy to indigenous peoples within Nicaragua and giving tribal authorities from these indigenous groups control. I'm not familiar with him. Giving the control to the indigenous people and their tribes and their organizations. That's part of it. Another thing that it means paving roads in these rural areas. It means building agricultural cooperatives. It means building schools. It means expanding hospital access. What Nicaragua is doing is pretty much the same as what's been happening in some of the more remote and rural parts of China since Xi Jinping has escalated the poverty alleviation programs of the Chinese Communist Party. Go to rural areas where people are impoverished, find out why they are impoverished, and based on that, come up with an effective model for changing that. And if it's successful in one area, apply it in another area. But if it doesn't work, you test another policy and you experiment with this. And through the process of trial and error, you raise people out of poverty. This is what the Chinese Communist Party does. And this is what the Sandinistas are doing. And the latest step forward in their poverty alleviation programs has been the formation of the bus cooperatives. And I saw Daniel Ortega, standing next to one of these buses announcing the bus cooperatives. I think that is tremendous. Imagine if we had a government here in the United States that went to the poorest parts of the United States, went to Appalachia, they went to the rural South, it went to the impoverished neighborhoods of Los Angeles and the Bronx, the poorest county in the entire country, and it found out why those folks were poor, and it developed mechanisms not to force these people to move somewhere else, but instead to alleviate their poverty, to bring development to those areas. That's what the government should be doing. That's what a government of action that would fight for working families would be doing. Unfortunately, instead, we have governments that are doing the exact opposite. In the United States right now, they are unpaving the roads. In 27 different states, you've had municipalities that have removed roads, and that's a disaster. We have this Joe Biden infrastructure plan that is just a joke. It's not getting things done. It's not taking dramatic action. We have barely any railway being constructed. We have water treatment facilities that are in decay. We have power plants that are falling apart. What the Nicaraguan government is doing with Grow Where You Are Planted is a very effective thing. It raises up the entire country. And it's interesting because it's in the Communist Manifesto. If you read the Communist Manifesto, at the end of it, Karl Marx, he lays out the program of the Communist League of Germany in 1848 when the document was published, right? That's what communists are supposed to do. They're supposed to lay out their program. And many libertarians will point to that program. But there's a 10-point program at the end of the Communist Manifesto. Now, those 10 points Marx says will be different in every country, but here in 1848 in Germany, here's what we have in mind as our program. This is what the Communist League of Germany went to people and said we're for. And it included public education. It included the creation of a centralization of credit into the hands of the state and a state national bank. And another thing that is in the program of the Communist League, published by Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto in 1848, if you go to the back, the list of 10 things on it, one of those things is to break down the division between city and countryside. You can go and look at this. Go, if you have a copy of the Communist Manifesto, turn to the back, the 10-point program, break down the division between city and countryside. And that was part of what they're doing. And right now, China is doing that, right? China's a huge country, so it's a lot harder to do it. But right now, in a smaller country like Nicaragua, that's what they're doing with these bus cooperatives, with Grow Where You Are Planted, with rural cooperatives that they are building. They're trying to make a situation where young people don't have to leave their communities and homes in rural areas. Indigenous folks from the countryside can stay in their areas, maintain their traditions, but also get electricity and get running water and get hospitals and get schools and get education. And you can see flourishing of the entire country. If you concentrate all of the economic development into one urban center, what that ultimately results in is the country overall getting poorer. However, if the wealth of a country can prosper throughout the entire country, that is how the entire country can become wealthy, right? Right now, we are seeing an attempt to collapse the United States economically. Our leaders very much want the United States as an economic entity, as a national economy, to collapse. And they instead want a global economic trade network centered around Southern California and New York City. And they want the United States as it exists, as a national economy with industries and such, to just be collapsed. And that's what we must resist, right? If you go back 10, 20 years, 30 years, Pittsburgh used to be better. Ohio, Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Youngstown used to be better. Michigan used to be better, right? Detroit used to be better, right? Minnesota, Minneapolis used to be better. All throughout the heartland of America, right? And all throughout the South, in Atlanta, in Memphis. You used to have flourishing urban centers. You don't have that anymore. Instead, we've got New York City, where the rent just keeps going up. The rent is too damn high. We've got Southern California. We've got Los Angeles. And people are desperate, and they're getting poorer and poorer and poorer. And so, as a result of that, the country gets poorer and poorer and poorer as people flee. And the middle, the center, the prosperous middle that once made the United States a flourishing economy, that prosperous middle, the industrial heartlands, the urban centers throughout the Midwest, throughout the South, even in the Northwest, Utah, Idaho, it's all just falling apart. It's all getting smaller, and it's all getting weaker, and it's economically, Baltimore is falling to pieces, says Chaya. I mean, this is what they are doing, right? And it's to fulfill the Atlanticist model of global trade, where control of the trade routes centers the economy around a few major financial centers and cities. Meanwhile, the rest of the planet gets poorer and poorer while the middlemen get richer. There's a fundamental difference between an industrial capitalist and a finance capitalist. And Vladimir Lenin explains this in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. An industrial capitalist wants to see economic development. Now, he's ruthless to his own employees, and he wants to pay them as little as he possibly can, and he wants to maximize his own profits, but generally, the industrial capitalist gets wealthier the more products that he sells. The more products he sells, the richer he is. The more people buy his products, the richer he is. The more that the country overall gets wealthier, the richer he is. That is not true for a banker. A banker does not get rich by selling products. He gets rich by lending people money. And lending people money is something you can do when people don't have anything. And in fact, the more desperate people become, the more predatory you can get with your lending. This woman who died at the January 6th demonstration, what was her name? Ashley Babbitt, right? She was a small business owner. She owned a pool cleaning company. And she had gotten a 600% interest loan. 600, because the pandemic had caused her such a problem. Thank you for the super chat. Some banker had charged her 600% interest on her loan, that she was going to pay 6 times. You know, in Woody Guthrie's song, Jolly Banker, which my good friend Paul likes to perform, all right, there's a line that says, "Give me back 2 for the 1 I lend you, because I'm a jolly banker am I." Well, in this case, it was give me back 6 for the 1 I lend you. That's what that's what was going on. This is criminal predatory behavior, and it used to be illegal. Did you know that? They used to have usury laws in the United States that made it illegal. In most states in the United States, there was a law that made it illegal to lend at that. There was a certain rate of interest you couldn't go above, right? However, thanks to Jimmy Carter, there are no state usury laws. Paul Volcker became the head of the Federal Reserve, and in the final term of Jimmy Carter, they lifted all of the restrictions on lending. There is a minimum mortgage rate that the Federal Reserve sets, meaning that you can't lend at a lower rate than that. But there is not a maximum anymore. And so bankers can lend at whatever rate people will accept. And when people are more and more desperate, the poorer people get, the more they will accept these kind of predatory practices. And now, obviously, this is not a political endorsement of Ashley Babbitt or what she did. I don't think Donald Trump was going to help her with that situation. But you know, this individual who was killed, it was mentioned that she had a 600% loan to keep her business going, because she was going to go out of business because of the pandemic. People weren't having pool parties, and she wasn't getting the business that she had as a pool cleaner in California. And so she got a 600% loan from a bank. A 600% loan, and that's criminal. That is absolutely criminal. Bankers have no problem with the world getting poorer. And there was an old friend of mine, and he probably doesn't agree with a lot of things I say now, but that's okay. But he coined the phrase accumulation through destruction. Now we've entered a phase, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, and now we're entering a phase of imperialism, where the primary way that the capitalists accumulate their wealth is through destroying things. The capitalists no longer engage in economic development in order to make their profits. They do the opposite, right? The capitalists enrich themselves not by having people get healthier and get more access to medicine. No, they enrich themselves instead by getting people hooked on painkillers and pushing doctors to overprescribe opioid medications. Instead of the capitalists getting rich by hiring workers to work in their factories and make products that they can sell, now the capitalists get rich by setting up prisons for profit and having people get locked up in jail and getting paid by the government per prisoner. Right? Nationalizing banks. That's good. Good question. Right? We have a situation at this point where the capitalists get rich by destroying countries. Bombing and destroying Iraq drove up the oil prices and enriched ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. Destroying Libya had a similar result, driving profits into the hands of big corporations and banks. And that it's primarily through destroying countries, through creating instability and chaos, through tearing things down, that the monopoly capitalists, the finance capitalists, the imperialists of our time, this is how they enrich themselves. They enrich themselves by impoverishing people. All right. Wrote it down. By impoverishing people. That is what they do. And that's the period we live in. We live in a period where capitalism at this point encourages destruction and is holding back economic development. And ultimately, this is what Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels thought was wrong with capitalism. Now we have this illusion, right? In leftist circles, the memo has been sent out. I don't know how people say this because this is so opposite of everything Marx ever wrote. If you read Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Friedrich Engels, If you read the Communist Manifesto, if you read Capital by Karl Marx, if you read wages, prices, and profits, wage labor and capital, if you read the Poverty of Philosophy, the point that Karl Marx makes over and over and over and over and over and over again, the point that he makes is that capitalism is holding back the productivity and growth of human beings. That capitalism, by being an irrational system, holds back growth because the capitalists operate the means of production, not functioning according to use. They don't have production for use, but instead they have production for profit. And it is the irrational anarchy of production, the chaos of the market. Because of that, human beings are held back. We are not able to achieve our great potential as a species. Another great example of that is fossil fuels. Who needs fossil fuels? The only reason we still have a petroleum-based global order is because the imperialists, the big banks on Wall Street, are all oil banks. ExxonMobil is very much the property of Chase Bank. HSBC Bank has dominion over British Petroleum. And if you look at all the big financial institutions, they tend to be tied to big oil companies. And if you add up the 4 super major oil companies in the United States, BP, Chevron, Shell Oil, and ExxonMobil, if you throw in total from France, you're now talking about 80% of the world's oil production. The reason that we still have a fossil fuel-based global order is simple. It's very simple, because that's how Wall Street makes money. And if we went to fusion energy, then they would not have their grip on the world once they did. That would be a problem now, wouldn't it? Right? That's why China and Iran are pushing so hard for fusion energy, because they want to get out of the oil-based global order. Russia is pushing hard for fusion energy. And Russia and Iran are oil exporting countries. Oil is a big part of their economy, but they still understand that the fossil fuel-based global order is a trap for humanity. Putin has called for global cooperation around fusion energy. Iran has been pushing for fusion energy. And in fact, years ago, I interviewed Dr. Eric Lerner, who runs the fusion energy research for the state of New Jersey. And he talked about how for a while, this lab in New Jersey that he runs, this facility that I visited, I did a story on it for Press TV when I was working with Press TV. This facility was actually having joint research and sharing publications and scientific research with a lab in Iran. And then when the sanctions came into effect, they were unable to continue cooperating with that lab in Iran, and he was very disappointed about it. Iranian scientists and American scientists were working on fusion energy together, but then the Bush administration and the Obama administration and now the Biden administration and the Trump administration worked very, very hard to prevent that cooperation. But Putin has called for global cooperation around fusion energy. China is making huge breakthroughs. You should read about the artificial sun that they have created in China. China is doing amazing things with fusion energy. But the Atlanticist global order, right? The big monopolies, they want to keep us on fossil fuels. And instead of pushing for fusion energy, which is the way to get out of the climate change disaster, instead they just say the way out of the climate change disaster is everyone's got to be poorer. Everyone's got to be poorer. And in fact, Boris Johnson said we should feed people to the animals. Maybe we should feed people to the animals. Did you see the clip? Go and watch the clip now. Boris Johnson was speaking to a group of children. And there's this kindergarten teacher woman sitting next to them. It's not a balance. Human beings are using up too many resources. It's not fair to Mother Nature. And then Boris Johnson is sitting there, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He says, maybe we should feed some people to the animals. And then this kindergarten teacher says, oh, well, we'll have to have a vote on that. This is a group of children. They're joking about to save Mother Earth. we couldn't have fusion energy, right? We couldn't innovate ways to change our relationship with our environment and start interacting in a more sustainable way. No, 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 no. We should just feed some people to the animals. We should feed some people to the animals. That's what we should do. Oh, feed some people to the animals. It's like, it's the sickest thing. You watch this, it's like demented. Feed some, and he's doing it with kids. He's joking about feeding people to the animals. I mean, that is demented. And I'm sorry. I hate to, for a minute, I might sound like one of these wokes, but do you think he's talking about feeding white people to the animals? Right? Do you think he's talking about feeding white people to the animals? Of course not. Of course not. This is about driving down the population in the developing world. Since the pandemic started, there has been, some people are estimating. Now, I want to get a confirmation of this number because it's just horrifying to me. I'm just shocked. But apparently there's talk that 1 million people died of malnutrition every month of this pandemic. 1 million people per month since this pandemic began died of malnutrition, whether in Africa, in Asia, in South America, that there has been, since this pandemic began, there's been roughly 1 million malnutrition-related deaths per month. That is unbelievable, right? And, they always want to give you this body count. Oh, communism killed, because, look at this. Because we have a world without infrastructure, because we have a world where people don't have access to electricity and running water, where people don't have stable incomes, people have been dying. The body count of this pandemic is massive. It's massive. It's just a horrendous reality, right? And who are the countries that are being attacked by the United States? Venezuela, where they paved the roads and wiped out illiteracy and built infrastructure. Cuba, which has the healthcare system that is the envy of the world. Who are they attacking? They attacked China, they attacked Russia, two countries that in the 20th century pulled themselves up out of poverty by their bootstraps, industrialized, raised their people up out of poverty with socialism, with central planning of the economy. Meanwhile, the aligned regimes of the United States, like Haiti, that's where people are desperately poor. Guatemala, Honduras, right? If you want your country to be dirt poor and starving, just have it align with the United States, have it sign on to an IMF, World Bank loan, have it tell China and the One Belt and One Road initiative to go screw themselves. And if you want your country to be dirt poor, have it sign on with NAFTA, have it sign on with the IMF, have it sign on with the World Bank, and have it sign on and have it give the middle finger to China and Russia. And you can guarantee that your country's poor. And that is absolutely true. You can guarantee that your country will be poor, right? Haiti, anti-China, friend of the United States, NAFTA, IMF, and it's wrecked, right? Where else? Guatemala, IMF, World Bank, U.S. aligned, impoverished, right? Guatemala, U.S. aligned, World Bank, IMF, and it's impoverished. You can go down the line, right? The poorest countries of the world where people are desperately poor are all free market countries. And the countries that have raised their people out of poverty are the countries that the USA is attacking and calls brutal dictatorships. Countries like Iran, countries like Venezuela, countries like Belarus, countries like Vietnam, right? When countries break free and start building their own infrastructure and building power plants and building schools, the U.S. government attacks them. Furthermore, on top of all of that, the U.S. government tends to be deindustrializing the homeland, right? Right now, we're seeing the deindustrialization of the United States, unpaving the roads, the Midwest of the United States is crumbling. The United States is becoming poorer and poorer and poorer. This is capitalism in decay. This is capitalism in decay that we're seeing all around us. But the other thing I wanted to share with you all before I end my opening remarks is that, I saw an interesting article. The state newspaper of Cuba is called Granma. That's the name of the ship that Fidel Castro went to Cuba on to launch the revolution. It was called the Granma, Granma. M-A, grandma, not grandma, but grandma, right, was the name of the ship. And that ship that Fidel Castro took, and it gives its name to the state newspaper in Cuba. And today, the Cuban state newspaper had a special report on the program that they have in Cuba right now to form, as part of their socialist economy, what they're calling non-agricultural cooperatives. And the article talks about, it says, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises are moving forward. And it had some interesting numbers in it, which I'm going to read off to you. So right now in Cuba, in September, they launched a call to form, right? Okay. September, the Cuban government launched a call for them to form non-agricultural cooperatives. And so far, there have been 550 different applications to form non-agricultural cooperative enterprises. And at this point, none have been declined. 102 have been approved. So since September, they have formed 102 new non-agricultural cooperatives. And in addition to that, in Cuba, you have 2,000 different state enterprises, and you have 600,000 self-employed workers. And basically, in order to strengthen Cuba's economy, the Cuban government right now is calling on workers in Cuba to form cooperatives, which are, enterprises where all the workers co-own it, right? Cooperative enterprises. And the idea is that these cooperative enterprises will provide services related to food, related to tourism, related to other things, and that will help the Cuban economy flourish, right? They're having market reforms to strengthen socialism, much like China did, right? The nature of socialism is not the government owns everything. No, the nature of socialism, it's socialism when the state controls the means of production. It's socialism when profits are not in command, when production is organized to serve public good and not the profits of a few. That's what socialism is. That's what socialism is. And socialism in China, it has a big market sector, also has a big state sector. It has 5-year economic plans. Socialism in Cuba is very similar. You should read some of the remarks that the president of Cuba gave about how Che Guevara guides them in all they do, and how revolutionary Marxism is central to what they believe, and such, and how they're building socialism and strengthening the country, and the importance of the Revolutionary Guards and such. But at the same time, they are helping the flourishing of a cooperatives in the market sector. And that's one thing that these people who push worker cooperatives don't understand. Under capitalism, worker cooperatives, okay, they're a little bit better because no one's exploiting anybody else, so the worker gets a share of the profits, but it's still capitalism. But in the context of a socialist society, right, when you have a centrally planned economy, worker cooperative enterprises and profit-sharing entities can really flourish. The best cooperatives in the world are all in socialist countries. Huawei Technologies was declared by Harvard Business Review to be one of the best examples of profit sharing actually working. And you'll never hear these bread tube freaks. You'll never hear the bread tube freaks talk about how great the worker cooperatives in Cuba, the non-agricultural cooperative movement in Cuba is. They don't talk about that. They'll never talk about how great Huawei Technologies is, how it's an amazing telecommunications manufacturer, so amazing that the U.S. imperialists went out of their way to kidnap and detain in Canada for several years the chief financial officer because they're so angry at the company. They're never going to talk about that. No, worker cooperatives, it's this pencil factory, and if you get up to Ben Shapiro and you open a pencil factory, it's like if you want to see worker cooperatives in action, go to Venezuela, right? Look at the colectivos and the communes in Venezuela. Look at the bus cooperatives in Nicaragua. That's where we can see real worker cooperatives in action, right? Workers' power and worker cooperatives, they're effective in socialist societies. And that just brings me to the last point I wanted to make. So today, the U.S. State Department had a briefing today, right, which they do almost every day. I think pretty much every weekday they have a State Department briefing. During that briefing, the U.S. government, a U.S. State Department official, you can see the clip, not making this up, announced that in Cuba on November 15th, there's going to be a bunch of anti-government protests. And the U.S. government is supporting these protests. On November 15th, there are going to be all kinds of anti-government protests in Cuba, and the U.S. government is going to be supporting them. This is not the only thing. The same thing happens in Russia with this Navalny stuff, right? The U.S. embassy promotes them. All over the world, the U.S. government supports instability protests. Now, could you imagine if Vladimir Putin came out and said, coming up in December, there will be a series of protests across the United States, and Russia is supporting it? We would never hear the end of it. Rachel Maddow would lose her mind and pull her hair out. They're meddling in our politics. Ah! They would lose their minds. But on November 15th, the U.S. government's staging a bunch of protests in Cuba, right? Navalny, when he was doing his Navalny thing in Russia, what is it? The U.S. embassy is supporting it, right? I mean, in Iran, all over the world, the U.S. government is staging protests, and they don't even make any bones about it. It's not like they boosted these things with Facebook bots. It's not like there was somebody who got highlighted in U.S. media. Oh, no. The actual representative of the U.S. State Department got up and announced that the U.S. government is supporting these protests almost like it's almost a month, maybe like a month and a half before half a month before they happen. Give me a break. Give me a break. Right? And then they want to tell us, oh my God, Russia, they bought some Facebook ads during the 2016 elections. Are we going to stand for that? And then the U.S. government is like bragging that it's trying to destabilize Cuba. It wants to turn Cuba into the next Libya. It wants to reduce Cuba to civil war. Have the country, people killing each other. They've already got Luis Posada Carriles, the guy who bombed an airline and killed a bunch of school children. They had him, living in Miami like a hero for many years. And they're just announcing this, right? That they're going to try to destabilize Cuba. And upcoming on November 15th, they're going to destabilize it. So you should just be aware of this. How ridiculous the imperialists can be. But what they are trying to do, if you want to understand what the imperialists are trying to do in our time, they are trying to stop economic development. They want the world to stay poor so that they can stay rich. That is the nature of imperialism. It is about holding back economic development. That's what's going on. They want to hold back economic development. That's what they want. That's what they want. That is what they want. And the reason they want that is that's where they can keep their monopoly. The world can be their captive market, their client state. That's the nature of imperialism. Imperialism is not Avatar. Imperialism is not computers. Imperialism is not bringing electricity and the white man's evil technological progress to these beautiful primitive people with their beautiful ways. That's not what imperialism is. Imperialism is keeping people poor so that the ultra monopolies on Wall Street and in London can get rich. And for a while, you could argue that imperialism benefited average Americans. They had a higher standard of living. They were part of what you might call an aristocracy of labor, but that is over. They are eliminating the aristocracy of labor right now. Wages are going down. Living standards are decreasing. And as a result of that, the moment has come where the working people of the United States can stand arm in arm with their brothers and sisters in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, who are fighting for their national liberation. They can stand arm in arm with the Yemeni people that are fighting against the Saudi invaders. They can stand arm in arm with the Nicaraguans and the Sandinistas. They can stand arm in arm with the Cubans. They can stand arm in arm with the Chinese, with the Russians. They can stand arm in arm with people all over the planet who are seeking their national liberation from the imperialists. And it is our duty as socialists in the center of the empire to make that link, to build an anti-imperialist working class movement that fights against Kellogg's on the picket line, fights against John Deere on the picket line, fights against the hospital and the hospital corporations and the big pharmaceutical companies with the striking nurses, but makes the link that the struggle of workers around the world for national liberation from imperialism and the struggle of working people here at home against the big monopolies and corporations is unified. That is our job. It is our duty to build a united front against the imperialists. That's our job, and those are my opening remarks for tonight. So on that note, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We just hit 18,000 subscribers. That is a victory. 18,000 subscribers, folks. 18,000. 18,000 subscribers. That is amazing. There are 18,000 people who have come to this channel and liked what they saw so darn much that they decided to subscribe. And that is a victory. And every one of you had something to do with it by being here, by building this channel, by resubscribing when the algorithms accidentally unsubscribe you, as has happened to many people over the years, by hitting that notifications bell, by posting these videos around. We have hit 18K, and you all did it, and this is a great victory for our community, and 20K is not that far off, right? We are winning. We are winning, and we are on fire. We are marching ahead, and we are doing great things. The Saxton Lectures are now completely available. The playlist for the Saxton Lectures is available, and all 8 Saxton Lectures are up there. And if you want someone to know everything they need to know about Marxism, send them the Saxton Lectures. We have already purchased the domain saxtonlectures.com. We are coming up with promotional material for the Saxton Lectures, and we are marching ahead. This YouTube channel, this community, the Center for Political Innovation, the John Brown Volunteers, Students and Youth for a New America, we are all marching ahead. We are on fire. I need people to start cutting up the Saxton Lectures. That's what I need. I need people to take clips from the Saxton Lectures that they like and posting them on YouTube, mentioning that they're from the Saxton Lectures, linking the originals. That would be extremely helpful to me if you would do that. I'm asking you to do that if you're part of this community. That is a way that you can help out, is cutting clips from the Saxton Lectures and posting them around. We need people to start doing that. Needs to be done. And we need to promote the Saxton Lectures. I think at some point we may publish a companion volume, a book with all the texts referenced in the Saxton Lectures so that people can study them. Kind of a study guide, but also a compendium of like Marxist classics and stuff. We got a lot of plans in the works. We still got the conference in California to post, right? Video from the conference in California. We got a lot of great stuff going on, folks. So names and locations. I will call you out as I see you, names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Kendall in San Diego. Carolyn in Staten Island. Oh yeah, Montreal. Micah in Las Vegas. Chaya in Montreal. Io in New York City. Shout out to you. Troy in New York City. Michigan Upper Peninsula. Viking Dave. JT24. Kieran from San Diego. Enoch from Australia. Alan in Utah. Tristan in Maryland. Shout out to you, Tristan. Hope you're doing well. Ryan in Oakland. Mike in North Carolina. Cleveland Pirate Alex. Cleed Bank. Dario from Brooklyn. Shout out to you. Christian in Northern New Jersey. Shout out to you, Christian. I think we'll make you a moderator, right? You're a good friend of the program. Temple City, California. Atlanta. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Clarence in Utah. Gotti in Connecticut. Tushar, shout out to you, Tushar. You're doing great stuff, I hear. Full of passion and dedication. Much appreciated. Flushing, Queens. Denver, Colorado. Bendigo, Australia. David Fox, good friend of the program. Welcome, good sir. Germany. Ontario, Canada. Trans-Marxist. Shout out to you. Sweden, Four Oaks, North Carolina. Mindanao to Midwest. Olympia Logic. Zach in Seattle, Wisconsin, Elias Wall, Melbourne, Mohsin from Iran, DL in Boston, Texas, Kayla Gray, Pomona, California, Balthazar in Oakland, Neil Fraser in Hong Kong, shout out to you, the Apartments of Justice, all right, very good, Halliburton, Canada, Alabama, Mobile, Alabama, Allen in Chicago, Carbota, Arkansas, B-Level from Canada. He's got a great YouTube channel. You should check him out. Ian in Glasgow, Scottish Maoist. The Woodlands, Texas. Robert from Hawaii, good friend of the show. Shout out to you. Leo and Miriam in Puebla, Mexico. There you go. There you go. Good stuff. Ben in Suffolk County. Mo in Toronto. Al Queck in West Virginia. Sam in Chicago. Shout out to you, Sam. Jay in Perth, Australia. Mass casualty. Congrats. Johnson County, North Carolina. Red Chilean, and you guessed it, in Chile. Shout out to you, my good friend in Chile. Caracas, Venezuela. Jose Gonzalez. Think you can be a mod as well, Jose, since you're here so much. So there you go. There you go. Stalin is based. I'm not seeing where your location is. I would call it out if I saw it. It's not coming up in my feed. You're complaining that I haven't done it. Where are you located, Stalin? Zachary in Richmond, Virginia. I think you can also be a mod, Zachary. All right. There we go. San Francisco. Ellie in London, right? Free Alex Saab. North Dakota. Minoy, North Dakota. Very good. John in Houston. Plainsfield, New Jersey at present, says Red Illuminati. Check out Red Illuminati's channel. He's been doing some great like fireside chat type videos. Good stuff. Newton Grove, North Carolina. Very good. Very, very good, folks. And now we start answering the super chats. What's going on in Sudan? There has been civil war in Sudan for quite some time. Harold Sullivan's in South Florida. Shout out to you. There's been civil war in Sudan for quite some time. Israel worked very, very hard to break South Sudan away from Sudan. South Sudan almost functions as an Israeli colony. It's got Israeli military there. It's maintained by the United States. And then in Sudan itself, the United States does not particularly like the guy who was the leader there for a while. There was a fear that he might start developing Sudan with China, so there's been an ethnic civil war between Muslims and Christians. And the situation there is not good. And the USA wants instability in Sudan. That's what you have to remember. Look at how big Sudan is. It is a big area. And it's got a history of independent governments, right, in Sudan. I mean, Sudan, there was some anti-imperialist forces there for a while. And if Sudan were to have peace, it could start to economically develop and become a strong country. That's what the imperialists do not want. And they broke away the South Sudan, and Israel was key in making that happen. And now there's instability, there's civil war in Sudan itself. When I was in college, I'll never forget the Save Darfur movement. It drove me up the wall. Still drives me up the wall. People who refused to go protest the war in Iraq when their own government was invading and occupying Iraq and killing people. They couldn't protest that because, somebody might disagree with me. But, they got this moral indignation. I am going to march for Darfur, save Darfur. China is bad for supporting the government of Sudan, and I'm going to take a moral stand against China. I just feel for those Darfur people so much, and it makes me mad. If you are going to protest against what the government of Sudan is doing, and the government of China is doing, or the government of Zimbabwe is doing, and you don't have the courage to stand up and protest against what your own government is doing, get out of here. You're a piece of crap, okay? It doesn't take any courage. It doesn't take 1 ounce of courage to be anti-China in the United States. It doesn't take 1 ounce of courage to be anti-Sudan in the United States. It does not take 1 ounce of courage to be anti-Cuba, anti-Venezuela, anti-North Korea, anti-Russia in the United States. But to question your own government and its wars, to expose the lies of your own leaders, to see through the deceptions of our own mainstream media, that takes courage. And nothing annoys me more than seeing these cowards get up and act like they're just such moral heroes for repeating mainstream media's propaganda against some country around the world. You're a piece of crap for doing that, okay? I'm sorry, right? Just you don't have to agree with me about the country. You could, if you can't see the moral hypocrisy, if you cannot see the moral hypocrisy, if you can't see the moral hypocrisy of that, if if you can't see the moral hypocrisy of not criticizing your own government, but feeling like you're some kind of superhero for opposing, for marching for Save Darfur, I don't know what to say to you. I really don't know what to say to you. It is infuriating to me, and I see this over and over and over again. People that are too cowardly to stand against their own government, but think that they're somehow self-righteous. They're self-righteous, I remember when I was in college. There was, what was it? Now it's escaping me. I'm distracted. I got all kinds of things coming at me. What was it? I actually lost my train of thought. Something happened when I was in college that was related to people being cowardly, and now I can't remember what it is. But that is my position. My position is that it's not heroic to repeat U.S. government propaganda against various countries that are under attack. All right, thoughts on Israel joining One Belt, One Road initiative? Did they actually do it? I don't know. There you go. China wants different countries to invest. Israel certainly has money. And, I personally would favor a boycott of Israel, personally, but I am not China, and China does not boycott Israel. So there you go. All righty. Someone said fash philosophy of Putin. I don't see that. I don't think Putin's a fascist. I don't think they're pushing fascist philosophy. Critical support. All right, writing it down. As far as fash philosophy, that's not. Putin's conservative. There is cultural conservatism in Russia. They value the family. They do have a state religion in Russia. Orthodox Christianity is the religion. And Putin did say some things. I'm not going to repeat what he said because you can go look what he said, and that's probably how most people in Russia feel. He also criticized capitalism and countered capitalism. And you have to remember, if you're expecting everyone around the world to adopt the woke social liberalism that we have in the West, you're delusional, right? Now, I am sympathetic to LGBT people, and I am in favor of gay marriage, and I don't want any of my trans friends to get harassed. I want them to be able to be who they are and not be bullied or discriminated against. I want to open doors for them. I want them to be able to, be who they are. And I think that, that a lot of things should be viewed as an issue of personal choice, right? That you're free to live your life the way you want, and other people are free to live their life the way theirs. But if you're expecting the whole world to, adopt, the social liberalism that we have in Western countries, pretty soon you're going to have to cancel the whole world. And if that's what matters to you, if that's all that matters to you, is that, right? If you don't care about people being lifted out of poverty, if you don't care about ugly wars and empire, if you don't care about One Belt, One Road initiative, if you don't care about schools and power plants and hospitals, all you care about is, well, what's their position on LGBT rights, or, if that's all you care about, pretty soon you're going to be on the side of the imperialists. And that's just how the world works. And it's really kind of interesting. I was talking to a good friend of mine today, actually, because it's very funny, because it used to be the opposite. You go back to the time when imperialism was first getting started, in the age when the British Empire was emerging, in the Victorian years. It was the opposite. The British were constantly accusing all the people that they were colonizing of being sex perverts and sexually deviant, and they were bringing Western morals to the colonized people, right? They joke, when in sex, they refer to the missionary position. Have you ever heard of that? The missionary position. Well, the reason they refer to it as that is apparently the British, the colonizers were going to the developing world, and they saw the colonized people having sex in all these outrageous ways, and they said, no, you're going to have sex in a very calm way. If you read a lot of the literature from like the 1800s, the 1800s, 1890s, 1900, 1910, The British and the United States are going to the developing world, and they're accusing all the people in Africa of being gay and sex perverts. I mean, that was the stereotype against Middle Easterners for a long time. They all had harems and prostitutes. They were all these wild sex fiends in the Middle East, and the men have 10 wives. It used to be that imperialism positioned itself as the defender of good Christian morals, conservatism. That was and the colonized people were the ones that were condemned and shamed for not being sexually moral. Now it's flipped. Now the imperialists go around the world talking about how woke and open they are sexually and condemning societies for being repressive, sexually repressive, and justifying their interventions on the basis of it. And that is how these things go, right? The imperialists will always make excuses for what they do, depending on what's trending, right? At the time of slavery, at the time the slave trade was going on, do you think that the slave owners were going around saying, boy, we're greedy and we want people who will work for free for us, so we're going to Africa and taking human beings as chattel property because we're just greedy assholes and we don't care about their human rights? Of course they didn't say that. I don't know who that is. They didn't say that. Instead, what they said was, oh, we are civilizing these Africans. Oh, we're giving them a chance to become Christians. Oh, we're helping them learn our Western ways, and we're educating them. That's what they said. But it was just a cover for their predatory behavior. And when the British Empire was colonizing people in the 1890s, of course they said, oh, these are decadent, primitive people who are having wild sex and they're doing crazy things and we're teaching them how to be good, moral Christian people. Well, that was a lie. And now, when they say, oh, we've got to send the military to Afghanistan to protect the women, and oh, Russia's bad, that Putin is transphobic. It's the same stuff. The imperialists will make up whatever lie to justify their actions based on what's trendy. Public opinion has changed. The LGBT rights movement exists. The trans rights movement exists. The feminist movement exists. So now that it's trendy to be woke, now the imperialists justify their imperialism differently. Imperialism is imperialism, and the essence of imperialism is economics. It's economic. The essence of imperialism is economic. Holding back development, keeping people poor, driving down living standards so that Wall Street and London can stay rich. And they might justify it in the name of social liberalism. They might justify it in the name of social conservatism. They might justify it in the name of Christianity. They might justify it in the name of anti-communism. They might justify it in the name of human rights. It doesn't matter. Imperialism is imperialism. Anti-imperialism is anti-imperialism. And don't get caught up in the confusion. We can be critical. I've been to Iran. I talked with folks in Iran about the LGBT question. Sing us a song, Keaton. You want me to sing you a song? I've talked with folks about the LGBT question, and I've talked with folks there about human rights, and I've heard Iranians say that there are things that they would like. All right. Centrist position. Sing a song. I've heard, there's room for criticism. Folks in China are the first to tell you they have issues with human rights. They'd like to improve. They would like to improve things with human rights. But at the end of the day, don't get caught up in this. All right, next super chat question. I'm going to hit two of these because they're very similar. First one is imperialism versus colonialism, and the other one is the origins and different types of imperialism, or different uses of the word imperialism. Okay, we need to be very clear about this, because this is a frequent argument I'll have with somebody on social media. Imperialism is an economic system. Vladimir Lenin wrote an entire book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Imperialism is capitalism in its monopoly stage. There are 5 characteristics of imperialism that Lenin lays out: the centralization of banks at the center of the economy, the emergence of cartels and monopolies, the carving out of captive markets in the developing world, spheres of influence. This is the nature of imperialism, right? Imperialism is an economic system. Colonialism is when one country takes over another country, right? United States. We had the 13 colonies, right? And it was a bunch of British people came over here, declared it to be their territory, declared it to be British territory, and lived here, and they were colonial settlers, right? Any country can engage in colonialism. Colonialism is one country taking over another country. That's it. That's all there is to it. That is colonialism. And imperialism is a global economic system, and colonialism is one country taking over another country. All right, we'll talk about that. Wrote it down. And that is the nature of imperialism. And a lot of people will say, well, Russia's not anti-imperialist. Look at Crimea. No. Imperialism is a global economic system. What happened in Crimea was that Russia has always had a military base there, going back, to like the Crimean War, throughout, the czars. There's always been a big Russian military base in Crimea. I have been to Crimea, folks. It is not a very big place. There's not much there, except there's a very big Russian military base. It's a little peninsula. And then, when Khrushchev came to power after the death of Stalin, they signed Crimea over to Ukraine. And they were all part of the Soviet Union anyway, so it didn't really matter. But they signed it over to the Republic of Ukraine for who knows what reason. And then the Soviet Union fell. And there was a treaty that was signed between Ukraine and Russia, which was Ukraine gets Crimea, but Russia gets to keep its military base there. Fine. Then in 2014, the United States staged a color revolution in Ukraine and overthrew the elected president, Viktor Yanukovych. Writing them down, folks. So after that, it suddenly became a question over whether or not the people in Crimea would be able to continue having, whether or not the military base of Russia would continue to be in Crimea. Furthermore, almost everyone in Crimea either works at the military base or knows somebody who works at the military base, it's not a very big place. On top of that, people in Crimea speak the Russian language. They do business primarily with the Russians and the Russian military base that's there. So, when it became clear this government in Kiev didn't want that military base there, when it became clear that the government in Kiev might even be outlawing the teaching of the Russian language in Ukrainian schools, and they were tearing down World War II memorials, the people in Crimea said, you know what, I think since we got the military base here already, we're going to join the Russian Federation. They took a vote. And the vote was overwhelming in favor of joining with Russia. And, there was no, rolling in of tanks because the tanks were already there, because Russia already had the big military base there. And that military base has been there since before the Russian Revolution. That military base has been there since, the Crimean War, since, the Tsarina Catherine, that military base has been there. So the idea that Russia took Crimea, that Putin was sitting up there on his throne and said, what can we do to oppress the Ukrainians? I know. Look at this area called Crimea. We shall take it. That's not what happened. That is not what happened. That is not remotely what happened. That has nothing to do with reality. And that's what you would think if you watch CNN. But CNN is fake news. And so, no, Russia's not an imperialist country. Russia, having Crimea join with Russia is not, and thank you, Johnny, I'm writing down your super chat. Russia joining with Crimea Crimea joining with Russia is not imperialism, and it's not colonialism either. But yes, the word imperialism, if you want to know the origins of it, right? Communism, imperialist. If it's global. The word imperialism, it comes from the term empire, right? The Roman Empire, right? The leader of an empire is the emperor, and the emperor's throne is the imperial throne. That's the origins of the word, right? Things relating to a nation are national. Things relating to a kingdom are I don't know what, and things relating to an empire are imperial. So that's where the term comes from. But there is a scientific Marxist definition of the term, which refers to a global economic system. And there are a lot of people that think the word just means country attacking another country or war or something like that. And they don't get it. And that's the difference there. All right. The how can intellectuals have a positive impact on the revolution? By spreading the truth to common people. By finding ways to spread the truth to the broad masses of people. That is the best way intellectuals can have an impact, a positive impact on the revolution. Spread the truth. Intellectuals tend to engage with ideas in ways that other people do not. And they can popularize the truths that are not obvious. For most people, what we talk about on here, the nature of the global economy, what socialism actually means, what capitalism actually means, for many people in the world, this is anything but obvious. But it is the job of the intellectuals who discover this stuff to make it more well-known and to make it more apparent to people. That is the job of the intellectuals, is to make people aware of things they are not aware of. I remember when the prison industrial complex was an obscure term that Angela Davis was using and nobody else was using. Prisons for profit, the prison industrial complex, nobody talked about that. But an intellectual named Angela Davis talked about it and wrote about mass incarceration. And then an intellectual named Michelle Alexander talked about it. And then a lot of leftists and people were protesting around it. And as the country transitioned, and there were fights in the ruling class, and Obama was aligned with some forces, and some forces were against him, gradually the concept of the prison industrial complex became widespread, and that was the work of the intellectuals that made that happen. There were academics, not just intellectuals. I think I'm an intellectual. I'm certainly not an academic. But there were academic intellectuals who worked very, very hard to popularize and raise awareness around the prison industrial complex. That was a very good thing, right? There are intellectuals have a responsibility to bring truths to people. And to use their position as an intellectual means they have the ability to engage with ideas in a way that most people do not. They're engaging with ideas, they have more time to do it. They have careers, jobs doing it. And as a result of their ability to engage with ideas, they become more aware of the realities of the world we live in than other people do. They can't just hoard this knowledge among themselves. And they can't just use this knowledge as consultants for the ruling class. They need to popularize this knowledge, and that is the positive impact that revolutionaries can have on the world. What do I think of the Great Reset? I think that the capitalists never let a good crisis go to waste. That any opportunity that they have to move ahead, maximize their profits, beat down their competitors, they will take. That's the first thing, right? And that's, the whole book, Disaster Capitalism. What is it? The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein is all about this. They used, after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, they got rid of public schools and, had all, charter schools. They got rid of public housing in New Orleans. There's many examples of this, whether it's earthquakes or a military coup in Chile, that when there's like a desperate situation, the capitalists never let a good crisis go to waste. So that's part of it. The other thing is that there are divisions within the ruling class right now. There are the ultra-rich, the monopolies, and they want to have a very managed capitalism. They want slow economic growth, and they want everything to be carefully controlled and managed to avoid some kind of social explosion. Then you have the lower level capitalists, the entrepreneurial capitalists, the fracking companies, the store owners, the hotel chain owners. Those folks do not want a managed capitalism because they won't be able to write the rules. They want a more free market system so that they can compete, and they resent the big capitalists because they get to write the rules. And so that's a divide, and that divide between the lower levels of capital and the ultra-rich monopolists, the Rockefellers and the Eastern establishment versus the lower-level capitalists, that divide has gone on in U.S. politics for a long time. And it's happening on a global level now. And in the Western world, the new right of Europe and Donald Trump in the United States and Nigel Farage in the UK, they represent the lower-level capitalists battling against the managerial control imposed by the monopolists. Well, the Great Reset is largely the pandemic giving the upper hand to the managerial capitalists to try and impose some of their managerial stuff. And some of it is about environmentalism, and some of it is about restrictions, and some of it's about security and surveillance and contact tracing. But at the end of the day, It's Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and the Silicon Valley monopolists, in bed with the Wall Street monopolists, in bed with the London monopolists, trying to come out of this pandemic with a much more secure grip on power. So their competitors in the fracking companies, their competitors in the lower level corporations are not able to mess with them as effectively. That's basically what's going on. And those folks, I will add, they trust the federal policing agencies in the United States much more than they trust the local policing agencies. Bill Gates likes the FBI a lot more than he likes the NYPD. And that part of the defund the police thing was about reshuffling the power, taking power away from local cops who are racist and awful and much less professional in how they conduct themselves. I mean, I'm not defending any of the activities of the police, but I'm telling you, part of the reason that some of the bigger level capitalists were for defund the police is they want some of the jobs that are done by local cops who are more pro-Trump and are more loose cannons and are more racist to be done by higher level. Feds, FBI, Department of Justice. Now, that might be better, honestly, in situations where you deal with police brutality and racism and stuff like that. Honestly, the feds are a little bit more professional in how they treat people. Let's just be real. I mean, you'd rather be arrested by the FBI than by, the NYPD, right? The NYPD is much, the local cop, who's some guy who got bullied in high school and has an authority complex or something like that, versus the FBI, that's a professional federal agency. The FBI is going to conduct itself in a much more by-the-book manner. Now, and that's good, right? I don't think police should be able to just beat people up randomly. I don't think police brutality should happen. Police shouldn't be able to extrajudicially kill people like they do and get away with for so long, spawning the whole George Floyd and Black Lives Matter rebellion. But at the same time, there's also a difference. The lower levels of the policing agencies are not as trusted by the ultra-rich, whereas the federal agencies are much more trusted by the ultra-rich. And that's a divide. That's a divide. And the FBI is vicious, don't get me wrong. I mean, COINTELPRO, read about what they've done. I mean, they've done very evil things throughout their history, and they still do. And right, and on January 6th, we don't know how much they were involved or let it happen or didn't do anything, or we don't even know. So I'm not letting those guys off the hook. But I'm telling you that within the state apparatus, right? That's what Lenin writes about, the state apparatus, right? There are divisions. And that part of what's gone on since the pandemic is that there's been more of an effort to try and concentrate the power in the hands of the federal government and federal policing agencies, as well as the big monopolies like Amazon and like Bill Gates and Microsoft and Google and the tech giants like the Rockefellers and the big oil companies. Part of this has been them trying to secure their monopolies and power and break the power of the lower level capitalists, the local cops, the fracking companies, Hobby Lobby, Home Depot. That Home Depot is owned by a Trump supporter. What's his name? I don't remember his name. The Koch brothers. There's a divide in the ruling class right now, and the Great Reset is in the section of the ruling class, Silicon Valley, the ultra monopolies, trying to secure their grip on power. Bernie Marcus trying to come out of the pandemic with the upper hand over their rivals, right, and trying to make sure that the new right, which was kind of an insurgency against their power, doesn't have it. You can see it here in New York City, for example. Right, in New York City, there's always been a push and pull between the local businesses that benefit from tourism, the local, restaurants and such, versus Wall Street and the UN, right? And that, the Ford Foundation is here, the UN is here, Wall Street is here, and that for the liberals and for the Democrats, New York City is the home to, big global-oriented institutions. It's the capital of global capitalism. And to Rudy Giuliani and to, a lot of the more Republican forces here, no, it's for tourism, right? And for the NYPD, it's for tourism, it's for local businesses, right? And that's why, they talk about Rudy Giuliani, quote unquote, cleaned up New York. Why? He let the police do all kinds of awful things, broken window policing. Well, that was about making the city more comfortable for tourists, so that tourists would come here and that would benefit those local businesses. Whereas the Democrats don't care so much about bringing in tourist money. What they care about is making sure that this is a great home for, all the NGOs centered around the UN and for the Wall Street multinational corporations, and the rest of the city can go to hell for all they care. And that's the division, right? And it plays out here in this city very much so, with the Democrats that are quote unquote globalist oriented and global neoliberal free market capitalism, with the more local businesses, them being more conservative, the Republicans that are racist and are supporting the police state and are trying to defend the profits of the wealthier folks that operate on a local level. And that's a divide. And New York City has had that divide as well, just like we've seen that divide on a local scale. We've seen that divide all over the Western world, and the Great Reset fits in with that. And right, since the pandemic here in New York City, the NYPD has been significantly weakened. Silicon Valley has been buying up. All kinds of stores and restaurants are closing. We're seeing a lot more homeless people and all of that. And New York City is, that Eastern establishment, that wing of the city has a lot more power. And that's what has happened, right? So there you go. Next question is dual power, which is a completely different thing. Dual power is in the process of a revolution. The new society builds up its institutions. When one class is in the process of overthrowing another class, they can't just come to power. They have to build up their own institutions. A great example of dual power would be the American Revolution. Right? The bourgeoisie of the United States, the capitalists of the United States, were trying to throw off the power of the British capitalists and the British monopolies. And so in order to do that, first they built in Virginia something called the House of the Burgesses. What's that? What is a burgess? A burgess is a property owner. And in fact, bourgeois is the French version, means property owner. And in English, it's an anglicized version of the word bourgeois. The Burgesses of Virginia, the property owners of Virginia, got together and they formed the House of Burgesses, which was an association of capitalists in Virginia to assert their interests. And then they formed the Committees of Correspondence, right, which were, and then they had the Continental Congress. And eventually, as the capitalists of the United States were looking to break free from the dominion of the British monopolies, they formed their own institutions and eventually their own army, the Green Mountain Boys. It was dual power, right? And during the Russian Revolution, and thank you for the super chat, Dylan. During the Russian Revolution, they formed Soviets, which just means councils. These councils that were formed in the process of the revolts in cities, they would form these Soviets. And these Soviets were new institutions of the working class. They were, Councils of Workers and Soldiers Deputies. That was the full name, right? The Councils of Workers and Soldiers Deputies, right? It would be people elected by workers and soldiers, deputies elected by workers and soldiers. They formed these things called Soviets. And in 1905, they had the Petrograd Soviet, which was this new institution that declared itself the government of St. Petersburg, and then it was toppled. And I believe Leon Trotsky was elected the speaker, or the president of the Petrograd Soviet. And then he went into exile after 1905. And then, during the Russian Revolution, you had the February Revolution, which toppled Tsar Nicholas II, set up the provisional government. And then there were two governments. There was the provisional government of capitalists, and then there were these Soviets that sprung up. And the slogan that the Bolsheviks used during the Russian Revolution was all power to the Soviets. They wanted these new councils of workers and soldiers deputies to become the new government. And that's eventually what the Russian Revolution was. It was the councils of workers and soldiers deputies, led by the Bolsheviks, becoming the new government. And this is a process, right? And in Venezuela, as in the transition to socialism, they built Bolivarian circles, citizens' power councils in Nicaragua. In Iran, they have these things called the Basij councils, that enforce the goals of the revolution. And that, yes, right, in the process of building a new society, you must build new institutions, right? That you must build, the institutions that will be the basis of the new state. That's what dual power is, right? And these popular committees that they have in Yemen, it's mobilizing the working class to become the ruling class. That's what dual power is. Just like the bourgeoisie, when it was fighting feudalism, built up its own institutions to become the new ruling class. That's how these things, they're a way for a communist movement to exploit advantage of the divisions within the ruling class. I will answer that. I have a lot to say about that. I have plenty to say about that, and we will get to that. All right. Pre-World War I period and our time parallels. In the lead up to World War I, it looked like all the imperialists were together. It looked like the Germans and the French and the British and the Americans and the Austro-Hungarians and the Turks, they looked like they were getting along, right? But they weren't. Beneath the surface, as the capitalist economy was getting into greater crisis, they were coming into greater rivalry with each other. And that's one thing that's happening now. It looks like the whole Western world is together, like the Germans and the Americans and the British and the French, and we're all together, but we're not. Beneath the surface, there's big differences between the Germans and the Americans, big differences between the French and the Americans. We saw what happened with the AUKUS deal. And so that's certainly a similarity, that you get this illusion that the West are all together and they're not. That's one parallel. Another thing, in the lead up to World War I, there was a big socialist movement in Europe that was led by fakes and phonies, right? Pro-war socialists, right? They said they were against the war, but then when it came time to actually prove it, they ended up supporting the war. And that is what's going on now. BreadTube is very similar, except it doesn't really have any organization behind it. But the way it preaches socialism while defending imperialism is very, very similar. I'm not going to talk about Chappelle. I just am not talking about that. If you're looking for someone to talk about it, look somewhere else. I'm just not going there. Sorry, Olympia. I apologize. I've made that clear on previous streams. I'm not going there. But in the lead up to World War I, there was this fake socialist movement, that existed, and it confused a lot of working people, and a lot of working people who were duped into supporting the war because fake socialist leaders like Karl Kautsky, there you go. So anyway. All right. Liberalism is no longer progressive. Well, liberalism is the belief that individualism comes above all else. Liberalism is the idea that celebrates the individual. That's what liberalism. That's what liberalism is. And coming out of feudalism, it was very progressive because it was saying, look, people do have individual rights, and people have the right to choose their own religion, and they have the right to, free speech and freedom of assembly. But liberalism emphasizes the rights of the individual. And we're now in a period where it's the ruling class that does that. They say, look, our individual right to exploit everybody else and get rich, everyone's for themselves. Collectivism is fascism, is totalitarian, it's communism. And liberalism is now a vehicle for the reactionary forces in our society. Whereas now is the time for people to come together and assert their collective interest. So liberalism was very progressive in defeating feudalism, but now it's holding back the collective interests of humanity. People need to be more collective in our time. So there you go. Alrighty. Nationalizing banks. Well, first of all, yes, we need to nationalize banks. And the Federal Reserve in the United States is not a national bank. It's a private corporation of private banks assembled by the U.S. government and directed by the U.S. government. But it's not a national bank. For every dollar the Federal Reserve prints, we get more into debt. And the Federal Reserve is a private corporation. The idea of a national bank is a bank that lends money not based on profit, but in the interest of the nation as a whole. And it strategically lends money in order to ensure economic growth. And that is in the Communist Manifesto, right? The centralization of credit in the hands of the state, right? I've talked about how, Lending money at interest leads to a creditor class. When people lend money at interest, pretty soon they're richer than everybody else because they ain't doing anything. They're just giving people money, and they get money back, and they get more money back. They make money by having money. And creditors, right, the creditor class, the financier class, inevitably becomes exponentially rich, right? The workers are never going to be as rich as the financiers. The industrialists are never going to be as rich as the financiers because the financiers don't have to do anything to make money. They just lend money and get money back, and lend money and get money back. And pretty soon you get a situation where the government is in debt to the financiers, right? And we have a situation now when you pay your taxes in the United States, your money doesn't go to build schools and hospitals and stuff. No, your money goes to pay back the loans that our government has taken out from bankers to build schools and stuff like that, right? The government is just a way for bankers to make money at this point, right? They've turned the government into a money-making institution where they lend money to the government so the government can just do normal stuff, and then they get interest paid back on it, right? I mean, the government just, generates money for the corporations. And, and this is what's happening. And so nationalizing banks puts credit in the hands of the state, and it lends money not based on what a private banker can profit from, but rather what's in the interest of the country overall. And that enables the population to make demands and pressure for the strategic lending of money, and it leads to more central economic planning. So I tend to think that nationalization of banking is a good thing. Were Jim Jones and the People's Temple really socialists? I mean, I don't know. They were a wacky cult. I mean, I've read about them. I'm very interested in any U.S. socialist history. I don't know what that is, Finn Shopes. I don't know what that is. I wish I knew what that was. People ask me about stuff I don't know about. I can't answer. But I do know about Jim Jones and the People's Temple. That's the next question I've got here. Mass suicide in 1978. Like 900 some Americans drank Kool-Aid and killed themselves. A horrendous incident. But before that incident, this was a religious cult in the United States centered around a pastor from Indiana who called himself Reverend Jim Jones. I don't know what you want to know about it. They were always kind of vague Christian socialists in the 70s because communism was so popular. First, they were in Indiana, and they were multiracial, which was progressive, right? And there was a multiracial church in Indiana. They had the first interracial adoptions in the state of Indiana. Then they moved to Ukiah, California. I've got a whole video about them if you want to look it up. I have a whole video just about Jim Jones and the People's Temple. I'm not going to go into all of that on here. They moved to Ukiah, California for a while, which is, like in Northern California. It's kind of a rural area. And then from there, they moved to San Francisco. And when they were in San Francisco in the 70s, Maoist communism and communism in general was very popular. So they started putting out a more communist message in the 70s. They were a religious cult. They did faith healing. Jim Jones claimed he could heal people when he couldn't. And he'd staged fake faith healing kind of stuff. But I mean, their message over the years, I mean, they believed Reverend Jim Jones had superpowers. They were anti-racist. They were kind of vaguely socialist because if you joined, you had to sign over all your property, and they shared everything. But it was a wacky, dangerous, authoritarian religious cult that had particularly vulgar practices involving corporal punishment. That was always a big part of their beliefs. They spanked people in the church. They had like big paddles, and they would spank people for breaking the rules, not paying close enough attention during the sermons or whatever. And then as they, again, like most things as they kept going, they got crazier. They started, I think they developed the theory that everyone was secretly gay. And so Reverend Jim Jones was having sex with men to prove that they were actually gay, to help prove to them that they were secretly gay, and he was having sex with women to help them overcome being secretly gay. And it was just a wacky religious authoritarian group. They put out a socialisty kind of message. In the 70s, it started to become a little bit more of an explicitly pro-Soviet message, but they were wacky. They were part of the left, though, and they were aligned with the Democratic Party of San Francisco and Mayor George Moscone and such. But they were an authoritarian group, and it's just like any of these groups. They work for who's paying them, right? I mean, Reverend Jim Jones, he wanted to be a god. He wanted to have his own army of followers, and he could have made an alliance with the Republicans, could have made an alliance. I mean, he ended up, because he was wacky, because he was anti-racist, because it was mostly a black church, and he was white, because, I don't know, for whatever reason, they ended up aligning with the Democrats. So, they were infiltrated by the FBI, that's proven. He was the housing board director in San Francisco. They ended up moving to Guyana, which was a Soviet-aligned country. I mean, it's actually pretty much a stain. I mean, the fact that they, in their final years, in the 70s, from the time they were in San Francisco up until the massacre, that they were putting out a pro-Soviet, pro-Cuba, and that Angela Davis hung out with them and stuff. Huey Newton of the Black Panthers hung out with them. That's a negative stain on our movement. Let's just be real. That's embarrassing. Right? That's a skeleton we've got in our closet, right? Clearly, this deeply unhealthy organization that ultimately culminated in a mass suicide, was hanging out with some of the people associated with our movement. That's a problem, and that's something that we should just admit, that, look, there are bad people who enter our movement. How much was the CIA involved? We don't know. How much was the FBI involved? How much did, they get manipulated? We don't know. Right? They were heavily involved in local government in San Francisco. That's very true, right? They were heavily involved in local government in San Francisco. I mean, he was actually the housing board director. He got George Moscone elected. He got Harvey Milk elected. So at the end of the day, not everybody. I mean, sometimes there are wacky. Look, what's interesting, you may not know this. I'll end this part with this. But, Reverend Jim Jones's cult, the People's Temple, was based on, almost all of their teachings and practices were copied from another religious group in Harlem, New York City, in the 1930s during the Great Depression. There was a religious cult called it was called the Church of Father Divine, right? And it was this black minister named Father Divine who also claimed he could perform miracles, who also had an interracial congregation. And Reverend Jim Jones basically went and studied Father Divine and modeled his religious cult on Father Divine. Well, Father Divine also had a relationship with the Communist Party USA, right? Now, Father Divine was a religious, figure and believed he could perform miracles and stuff, but he believed in anti-racism. His congregation was white and black, and he was in Harlem, which was, the capital of Black America. They talk about, 125th Street is like the most important street in all of Black America. And in Harlem in the 1930s, the Church of Father Divine was a very important institution. And because the Communist Party was fighting for black liberation, because fascism and was a big threat to the black community, because Roosevelt and the Popular Front was seen as an ally of the black community, in the North at least, the Communist Party, Earl Browder, and Father Divine hung out with each other. Now, does that make the Communist Party USA responsible for what Father Divine did? Of course not. It just means that and Father Divine, I mean, his followers never committed mass suicide, but it was a wacky group. He claimed he was Jesus, and he was, they claimed he could perform miracles and stuff. You can read about Father Divine in Harlem. It's a strange religious cult, all right? It's a strange religious cult. I think there's even still a few of them around still, but mostly African-American, but a lot of white people too, and it's a religious cult that was big in the 30s, and they were anti-racist, and they were supporting civil rights, and they were important in the black community, and the Communist Party worked with them, and they had anti-fascist rallies with them, and stuff like that, and that's okay, right? And sometimes, when you're building a united front, sometimes you have to work with people who are a little problematic, right? During the Russian Civil War, the Bolsheviks helped arm a group of Zionists, right? There was a group of Zionist Jews in Russia who saw the Bolsheviks as allies against anti-Semitism. So there was a special division of the Red Army that was labor Zionists, that was pro-Israel. And after the Russian Civil War, a lot of them just left Russia and moved to Israel. But they exist. You can read about this. There was a Zionist division because the Bolsheviks defended Jews from anti-Semitic pogroms, and the White Army went around killing Jews. And so there were a group of Jewish Zionists who said, hey, Bolsheviks, we don't agree with you, but, you're defending Jewish villages, and that's what we do. And so there was a Zionist militia. Does that mean the Bolsheviks collaborated with the Zionists? No. I mean, just like the communists of San Francisco, Angela Davis and others were friendly with Jim Jones. I mean, the Bolsheviks were friendly with some Zionists, the labor Zionists of Russia. They had an alliance during a civil war, right? The Communist Party USA hung out with Father Divine. In real life, people have to sometimes make alliances with problematic individuals. And it looks like, for whatever reason, Jim Jones in the 1970s in San Francisco, which was a wild political climate during that time, right? I wasn't alive, but I've heard that San Francisco in the 70s was pretty wild. And I've known some people who were there at the time, and they've told me how wild it was, right? In San Francisco, in the 70s, there was this church, the People's Temple, that entered an alliance with the Communist Party USA and with various black nationalist and revolutionary groups and with the Democratic Party of San Francisco. That happened. And it's really horrible the way that ended, and it's really awful the practices that went on in the church. They were beating people, there was sexual abuse that went on and ultimately culminated in a mass suicide. That's awful. It's a shame. That's all we can say about it. But should we be surprised that communists at some point had to make an alliance with a bad guy? No, we shouldn't be surprised. During the Second World War, the United States aligned with the Soviet Union. The U.S. imperialists aligned with the Soviets to defeat Hitler. Sometimes politics is an ugly business, folks. Sometimes there are going to be people that are problematic that we have to shake hands with. In real life, in order to get things done, you have to work with other people. When you're just sitting on the internet going, I'm so pure, you don't have to talk to anybody, right? And, if you're never getting anything done, you're never getting anything done, right? If you're just sitting on the internet going, hey, you don't have to get along with anybody. You can be the only person in the world who agrees with you. You can be right. In the real world, sometimes there are messy people who come around, and it looks like Reverend Jim Jones and his wacky religious cult, they were friendly with, communists in San Francisco, and there was some convergence of interests, and that's a real shame. But yeah, read about Father Divine, because that was so long ago. But Father Divine, his religious cult in Harlem was a big influence on Reverend Jim Jones. I mean, it was very much... It was just, what Reverend Jim Jones did was almost just like an amped up version of the religious group that Father Divine had in Harlem. And you can see that. Often political movements are inspired by other political movements. There's a continuity. Religious movements, political movements. You look at it, there is a continuity. You can see like, okay, this person was doing something similar, but then somebody else took this idea, and you can see that, right? I mean, Scientology is very much inspired by, I would argue, is very much, you can see a direct influence of Wilhelm Reich, the psychoanalyst crackpot, anti-communist psychoanalyst of New School University with his orgone machine and all that. Scientology is in a lot of ways a very similar thing, right? Kind of a therapy, magical machines that you hook yourself up to, space aliens, this guy who's like the great... if you look at it, in a lot of ways, Wilhelm Reich inspired Scientology. Well, Father Divine in Harlem inspired Reverend Jim Jones. And you can see these kind of continuities when you study political movements as intensely as I have, because I have studied these things intensely, right? I want to rescue the United States from capitalism. I'd like to actually get us to socialism. No, I'm not content. I'm not like Isha, who just wants to sit there and feel like she's smarter than everybody else and condemn U.S. society. I'm not Jason, who's just sitting there playing video games and smoking weed and has got my mohawk. I actually want to see a socialist society. I would like the United States not to crumble and fall apart, but rather to dismantle imperialism and move towards socialism. And because of that, I take all of this really seriously. I do. I take all of this really seriously, and that requires me to do some investigations, and that has led me to study all kinds of things, and to study that's why I'm able to answer all your questions. Not all of them. Sometimes you all ask me about things I don't know, but that's why I'm able to have these long chats talking about shit, is because I've read a lot of shit, because I'm trying to understand the world in order to change it. Philosophers have only sought to understand the world. The point, however, is to change it. Karl Marx. All right. Next question. Oh boy, it's going to be a long night. Is Kamala Harris more dangerous than Trump? Yes. Donald Trump is a self-serving egotist who really doesn't care about the interests of U.S. imperialism. Kamala Harris is a synthetic personality who is easily manipulated by the regime change, global revolution, Silicon Valley fascists. I would argue that yes, Kamala Harris is more dangerous than Trump. Trump doesn't care. Right? I mean, I remember, if I'm not mistaken, Donald Trump said that the reason that the USA stopped pressing for regime change in Venezuela was, quote, he was bored with it. Whereas Kamala Harris is somebody who has been so badly traumatized and is so much of a narcissist. You read my book on Kamala Harris. I go into great detail about her. She is so much of a narcissist. She is obsessed with her 10-year-old self. She feels really sorry for herself. She sees herself as a victim. She's in deep pain. And she's really easily manipulated. They know how to push her buttons like you wouldn't believe. And, she's surrounded by Silicon Valley fascists, by the Hillary Clinton State Department's cast of characters, cast of ghouls, Anne-Marie Slaughter, Samantha Power. She's surrounded by some of the most evil regime change people in the world. And they know they can play her like a flute. And she's what you call a synthetic personality. When somebody is at the point where their behavior is so easy to manipulate and control, their emotions are so extreme that you just know how to just tap them and they go, I mean, you don't really even have to manipulate them very much. Read about how Obama was pushed to intervene in Libya. They worked on him for several days and they pushed his buttons and they pushed his buttons and they pushed his buttons and they pushed his buttons. Finally, he did it. They don't have to do that with Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris, they just say, hey, Kamala. And they know what sets her off, and she'll bomb a country for them. She'll push the nuclear button for them. She's crazy, right? She's ruled by her emotions. She's ruled by her trauma and her past. She's obsessed with her own childhood in a really unhealthy way. She hates her father, and she sees herself as a victim. That little girl was me. She's not well. She's not well, and a lot of times she's probably on drugs. If you look at the way she interacts with people, I mean, she's not all there. People think she's drunk. I don't think she's drunk. I think she's on some psych meds of some kind. She's on some heavy psych meds, and she's really unstable, and she's really emotional, and and they know how to push her buttons, and they can get her to do with whatever they want. It's the exact opposite of the problem with Trump. Trump, the problem was he didn't care. He just did whatever he felt like. Right? He lost the election and he's like, hey, why don't I have all my fans go wreck the Capitol? He doesn't care. Trump doesn't care. Trump is a self-serving narcissist who doesn't care. And Kamala Harris, on the other hand, they know exactly how to get her to care. They know how to play her like a flute. And that's the problem. That's the problem. Read my book on Kamala Harris. Read my book on Kamala Harris. Go read my book on Kamala Harris. Read my book on Kamala Harris. Seriously, you like the BreadTube book. That's great. My book about some YouTube streamers is great. But my book on Kamala Harris was, I think a little bit more important. She could very soon be the president. And that is terrifying. All right, is El Salvador fighting imperialism with Bitcoin? Yeah, right? The imperialists don't, this is El Salvador fighting the establishment of the West with, yeah, they definitely are. I'm not necessarily endorsing Bitcoin. I mean, China did outlaw them and all of that. But yes, El Salvador, this is a way to fight the petrodollar. This is a way to fight the currency, domination of Western capitalism. Yes. All right. Critical support for black nationalism. Whenever black people are organizing for their own rights, I obviously wouldn't agree with everything they ever advocate, but yes, when black people are asserting their right to self-determination, saying we consider ourselves to be a nation, that is a good thing, right? And so yes, I am sympathetic with all black nationalism. But you have to remember the choice of integration or separation is ultimately up to the oppressed people. Right? And we shouldn't be going around. It's one thing to support black nationalism, to say that the Black Panthers are a good thing, to see the Nation of Islam as a good thing. That's one thing. It's another thing to go around advocating separation. And the choice of integration or separation is up to black people. If black people want to integrate fully with white society and demand affirmative action and demand that should be respected. And if black people want to separate and they say, no, we want to have our own territory, that should be respected as well. Not up to white people to decide. So I don't go around advocating the independence of the black belt, because if I did, that would sound a lot like segregation. And right now, it doesn't seem that black people want the black belt. If they did want the black belt, and they were in their millions demanding a separate national territory, I would, of course, be loudly supporting their right to that. Right now, it seems like most black people don't want the black belt. But if they did, it would be a different situation. All righty. All right. Ron DeSantis, I don't know enough about him, honestly. I just don't know enough about him. Centrist position between, I just don't know enough about him. I'll have to look into him. All right, sing a song. Well, is it anyone's birthday today? Because years ago, someone sang me this song. It is a song that one would sing to someone on their birthday. It goes like this. This is your birthday song. It is not very long. So there you go. There you go. That, I sang you a song. I sang you a song. All righty. All right. Next question. Holodomor. Well, look, the Soviet Union built a very effective agricultural system. Right? They had private farming in the 1920s, and then during the 5-year plans, they transitioned to the collective farm system. Obviously, there was a famine in the early 30s, and that famine was a disaster. And that famine happened at a time they were transitioning from private farming to collective farming. But once that transition was over, they had a very effective agricultural system. So when people say, well, communism causes famines, no, there were famines in Russia all the time before the revolution. And it was the Soviet government that mechanized agriculture and brought tractors to Russian agriculture. So there you go. I'm sorry. It was, and same with China. It was China. It was the Chinese Communist Party that built the modern agricultural system of China. So I don't get where people get this. Communism causes famines. No. Famines happened for hundreds of years before communism. And then communism built the power plants and brought in the tractors and mechanized the agriculture and created modern agricultural systems in both Russia and China. So the narrative that you get about Holodomor, which is evil communism causes famine because communism just doesn't work anywhere, that's not what happened. I'm sorry, it was communism that created the modern agricultural system of Russia. There was no modern agricultural system in Russia before the communists. So I don't get where people get this. And again, people want to argue with me about details of it. I don't get into that because I'm not a Soviet historian, and honestly, but I'm sorry, you're missing the forest for the trees. You want to get into how many deaths were caused by this? You're missing the forest for the trees. There was a famine in Russia in 1931, and it was in Ukraine, and it was in Moldova, and it was in all of the Soviet Union. That happened. Yes, that happened. Were there famines before the communists came in? All the time. Did the communists build a modern agricultural system in Russia that cured those kind of famines? Yes. So by emphasizing this famine, you're missing the entire point. And the same with the Great Leap Forward, right? Were there deaths of starvation in China before the communists? All the time. Are there deaths of starvation in China now? No. What happened? The communists came in and built a modern agricultural system. And again, people want to get caught up in the details. Big picture here, Russia before the communists came in, Russia after the communists came in. Looks like the communists got some things right. China before the communists came in. China after the communists came in. Looks like the communists got some things right. It's so freaking obvious. It is so freaking obvious that communism has had economic successes. Russia and China were dirt poor. Then they had communist revolutions. Then they industrialized. They defeated the Nazis. They raised millions out of poverty. It's like, hello, but people just don't want to see that, right? No. There's always some, they heard some story about a Ukrainian farmer, and people they don't want to see what's in front of their eyes. It's fine if you don't have an answer. Accusations of imperialism from Russia against Russia from Georgia. I don't even know. Georgia, I haven't followed the latest there. I know there was an intervention. I believe in 2008, Georgia attacked South Ossetia, and as a result of that, Russia retaliated by attacking Georgia. And U.S. media ignored the first part. Globe makers ignored the first part. And never bothered to mention that it was actually Georgia that started it, that Georgia attacked South Ossetia. And it was like amazing. I was sitting there and I'm just like, okay, it's like Russia. You would think that Russia just attacked Georgia in a fit of rage, when in reality what happened was Georgia attacked South Ossetia, which is a territory that Russia was defending. And so Russia said, oh, you attacked us, we're going to retaliate, show you can't attack us. But they never talked about it that way. U.S. media is deceptive and manipulative. Surprise. Twilight Zone, Rod Sterling. That is McCarthyism breaking. It's the end of the 50s. Joe McCarthy drank himself to death. Détente, Stalin is dead, and McCarthyism is starting to bog down in the United States. And so Rod Sterling in the Twilight Zone, late 50s, early 60s, Kennedy era, that's Cold War liberalism, anti-totalitarianism, right? Equating McCarthyism with the Soviet Union, saying we're great in the United States because we have a tolerance of ideas. A lot of Twilight Zone episodes are against conformity. It's kind of, they're against conformity. They're against authoritarianism. They're against quote-unquote totalitarianism. It's liberal. It's Cold War liberalism. That's the Twilight Zone. Cold War liberalism. What's interesting, though, is while it's also against Cold War liberalism, there's a lot of talk of loneliness. You watch the Twilight Zone, there's many episodes that are about loneliness, which is also part of liberalism, right? Liberalism emphasizes the individual. Right, and the Twilight Zone was largely a repudiation of McCarthyism and groupthink. Right, it's saying that and it's a lot like the movie The Manchurian Candidate that came around those years. A lot of the science fiction of the early '60s was like this. Right, it was like arguing that whenever there's some kind of authoritarian movement, it's going to take away your freedom. McCarthyism was an authoritarian movement. It's like the synthetic left is starting to emerge as a response to McCarthyism. McCarthyism failed to defeat communism. The Soviet Union wants to negotiate, so we have the synthetic left kind of getting itself together and emerging as like take two. And I talk about that in the Kamala Harris book and the trajectory of U.S. politics, et cetera. And that's what the Twilight Zone is about, but it also emphasizes loneliness. A lot of episodes, there's a nuclear war, and there's a guy walking around all by himself, and his glasses break. There's an episode where there's a guy who's like, going into space all by himself. A lot of episodes about loneliness, and that's part of liberalism, right? And that coming out of World War II, U.S. society, we had all this wealth, but people felt much more disconnected from each other. A lot of the closeness and solidarity and kindness people once had faded. Americans, suddenly they had houses and cars and TV sets, but they didn't. The love was gone. The alienation had increased. That's part of Cold War liberalism as well, right? There was this kind of, it's very interesting. Very, very interesting, right? The Twilight Zone, that's the mindset coming out of World War II after the decline of McCarthyism, Scopes, monkey trial. After the decline of McCarthyism, it's Cold War liberalism, bemoaning the alienation, but also equating all forms of collectivism with Nazis and communists and McCarthyists, right? All collectivism is bad. All right. Would communism be imperialist if it went global? No, because communism would have countries trading with each other on the basis of win-win cooperation. Imperialism is when the big banks and corporations based in one country keep another country underdeveloped. Imperialism is about holding back development, whereas a global communism would be about countries developing and getting wealthier together. So that would not be the case. All right. Next question. All right. Can we exploit the divisions in the ruling class? Not at this time, but we will eventually. My theory is that eventually the small business owners in the United States, those lower level capitalists, are going to become so battered and so beaten back by the big bourgeoisie that they're going to have to give up their libertarianism and enter a strategic alliance with the labor movement and with the socialist countries around the world. Right? It is in the interest of lower level capitalists to do business. Israeli intervention. In Mideast. It is in the interest of lower level capitalists to do business with Russia, with China, with Venezuela, with Iran, with Cuba, and it is in the interest of the higher level capitalists. It is in their interest to do the opposite, to isolate those countries to maintain their monopoly. Furthermore, the lower level capitalists, it is in their interest to see economic development of the United States, paved roads, decent schools, decent hospitals, infrastructure of the United States to get better, whereas the interest of the higher level capitalists is demolishing the United States economically so that they can set at the center of a global empire. And eventually the lower level capitalists, it's going to be a long time. It's going to be very difficult, and they're going to have to really, really get pummeled by the big capitalists first. Eventually the lower level capitalists will enter a strategic alliance with the anti-imperialist countries around the world and with the labor movement in the United States and the working class. Eventually. Could individual U.S. states get involved with BRI? No, that's not how it works. That would be cool if they did, but unless I'm not aware of something. But that's my feeling, that eventually the lower levels of capital will enter a united front with the working class and with the anti-imperialist countries. There will be a popular front against imperialism that will emerge with those lower level capitalists, but it'll be forever. Right now they're preaching libertarianism. Right now they're preaching that China secretly rigged our elections to hurt Donald Trump. Overproduction and empty shelves. You're killing me, folks. I am running out of energy here. All right. All righty. Okay. But there you go. That's my theory. All right. The Cloak Makers Union is a no-good union. It's a company union by the bosses. Those right-wing cloak makers, they are socialist fakers who play upon the workers' double crosses. The Hillquit Stabinskis and the Thomases are making the workers false promises. They preach socialism, but they practice fascism to preserve capitalism by the bosses. Next question. Thank you. Right? I should make a rule. No one can ask me to sing songs. I feel like that's degrading. You don't do that. I should make a rule against that. Next question. Scopes monkey trial. What was it? It was sometime in the 1920s. A high school teacher in Kentucky was arrested for teaching Darwin's theory of evolution in a school, and they had a widely publicized trial. And they made a movie about it in the 1950s, a stage play, and then later a movie in the early 60s, and that has nothing to do with what actually happened. Got it, Keaton. That has nothing to do with what actually happened. The Scopes Monkey trial was largely, H.L. Mencken of the Baltimore Sun, who was this awful elitist columnist. He basically argued that the people of Kentucky, the working class people, were idiots because they were religious. They were proof of evolution because they were inferior because they would, and it was the campaign against. The campaign in favor of teaching evolution in the press was very classist and bigoted. Meanwhile, the appeal of the anti-evolution forces, William Jennings Bryan and others, was actually very populist. They argued, one of the arguments at the Scopes Monkey trial was that Darwinian evolution, survival of the fittest, would justify sweatshop labor and the exploitation of workers and such. And so the political discourse in the 1920s was a bit different. William Jennings Bryan was kind of a populist, liberal who had advocated progressive reforms for the working class and was fanatically religious. Whereas Clarence Darrow, now he was associated with labor unions and communists, but the people supporting him, not Clarence Darrow himself, but a lot of the people supporting him in the New York Times and in the Baltimore Sun, were very classist and in favor of free market, stuff. They were supporting evolution because they argued that some people are just naturally better than others. Now, when McCarthyism came along, the play Inherit the Wind, which they made into a movie, is a complete rewrite. It's about McCarthyism. The mob of rabble are coming to persecute the intellectuals. That's McCarthyism. It's not really about what happened in the 20s. The atmosphere at the Scopes Monkey trial was very much populism versus elitism. Political discourse was very different back then. It was very, very different, in the 1920s. A lot of those people in Kentucky who were creationists worked in mines. And the Communist Party, if you read Labor's Untold Story, they refer to the Scopes Monkey trial as a distraction from the class struggle. Nowadays, the communists would all come out, swinging in favor of the evolution. But the way the Communist Party saw it, this was a way to distract from the class struggle. It was a Kulturkampf. It was a culture war to distract from the class struggle, pitting the workers who believed in science against the evangelical conservative workers. And that was the right approach. The Communist Party wanted class struggle. They were saying we need to focus on freeing Sacco and Vanzetti, not on, debating whether or not they should teach evolution in the schools of the U.S. government. So there you go. All right. Books on Israeli intervention in the Middle East. Bush in Babylon is a pretty good book. It's by Tariq Ali. That's a pretty good book. What other books? There's a book, it's called Overthrow by Stephen Kinzer, and it goes over the coups the United States had in Iran. I think he wrote another book called All the Shah's Men. There's a very good book that I quoted years ago about, goodness gracious, I can't remember what it's called. It's a history of U.S.-Israeli relations. It begins with Roosevelt and his rejection of Israel, and how it was really Roosevelt dying was decisive for Israel coming in. Can't remember the name of that book. It was a book like kind of a history of U.S.-Israeli relations. It was written by a rabbi, but it's a very anti-Israel book. I can't remember the name of it actually, but I've quoted from it many times. It talks about Roosevelt's anti-Israel position. So there you go. There you go. Sorry I can't give a longer answer, but I'm running out of steam here. Overproduction and empty shelves. Look, the chaos of the market. The supply chains are all screwed up. We have profits in command. We don't have central planning. And so as a result, items are not being delivered. Wait till Christmas comes and there's no liquor. Wait till, Black Friday this year is going to be wild because there's going to be empty shelves. I thought only socialism causes empty shelves. I thought only communism causes empty shelves. I thought Venezuela, Meanwhile, the USA creates empty shelves in Venezuela with brutal sanctions, but that's socialism's fault. And now we're going to see empty shelves all over the United States due to the chaos of the market. And that's where this stream is ending for tonight, folks. You wore me out. You wore me out. I earned my pay for today. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today.